And God was saying to prevent the plague, not to bring forgiveness of sins, not to bring you into a right relationship with God when you sin, not to take the place of blood sacrifices, none of the above, but to prevent a plague from breaking out. Remember I said one of the meanings of kippur is to turn away wrath. Just like we saw the Greek word in the New Testament can be a propitiation for sins or something that turns away God's wrath. Flip sides, the same concept. This is simply saying money will be given into the tabernacle, into the temple account as a ransom. Now, where does this ransom concept come from? Take a look back a few chapters to Exodus chapter 21. Beginning in verse 28, if a bull gores a man or a woman to death, the bull must be stoned to death, and its meat must not be eaten, but the owner of the bull will not be held responsible. If, however, the bull has had the habit of goring, and the owner has been warned but has not kept it penned up, and it kills a man or woman, the bull must be stoned, and the owner also must be put to death. However, if payment is demanded of him, he may redeem his life by paying whatever is demanded. This law also applies if the bull gores a daughter. If the bull gores a male or female slave, the owner must pay 30 shekels of silver, and the master of the slave and the bull must be stoned, and so on. The concept is that he must pay a ransom. It is a ransom payment. If he killed somebody himself, he murdered somebody, he shed blood, there is no ransom that could be paid. However, if in this case it happened through negligence of his goring bull, he's going to pay for it unless a payment can be arranged, a ransom payment, to prevent further judgment. It's the exact same concept that's being used here in the 30th chapter. This is a ransom payment. This is to protect wrath from coming, or to stop wrath from coming. God will accept this monetary payment. We have the exact same thing happens in Numbers 31. After the people are numbered, they quickly put together silver, gold as a ransom payment to the Lord so that wrath will not break out. So you could look at this two possible ways. Money was being paid, look, for the service of the tent of meeting, verse 16. And it's a memorial for the Israelites before the Lord, making atonement for the laws, because it's going into the tent of meeting, tabernacle, temple system, which was the very place of atonement and altar of atonement. Or it's got nothing to do with atonement whatsoever in terms of coming into right relationship with God. It's simply a ransom payment. This is something God required of the people to turn away wrath. Why was there wrath with the census? Why did money prevent that? Those are excellent questions to dig into, but this much we know. It has nothing to do with getting into right relationship with God. It has nothing to do with sin. It has nothing to do with repentance. It has nothing to do with purification. It has nothing to do with anything that the whole atonement system had to do with. The only thing in common is it uses that same root here in the sense of ransom. But to try to say, as I've seen in some anti-missionary lists, there are different means of atonement. Prayer, they quote verses which we saw don't apply. Repentance, which is a parallel track but does not replace blood atonement. Then they'll say money, and they'll quote this, and you read it like, oh, atonement, money. Read it carefully. Has to do with turning away wrath, which is a common meaning as recognized by some of the top Jewish biblical scholars in the world today. Turning away wrath, turning away judgment is part of the meaning of lechaper. What about people that couldn't afford an animal sacrifice? What did they do? Well, Leviticus 5 lays that out. Leviticus chapter 5 lays that out. What does it say? Verses 11 and 12. If, however, he cannot afford 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, this is for various offerings, sin offerings. He is to bring an offering for his sin, 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour for a sin offering. He must not put oil or incense on it because it is a sin offering. He is to bring it to the priest, who shall take a handful of it as a memorial portion and burn it on the altar on top of the offerings made to the Lord by fire. It is a sin offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for him for any of these sins he has committed, and he will be forgiven. The rest of the offering will belong to the priest, as in the case of the grain offering. So, if you don't have blood, you bring flour. And the flour is a sin offering. There are several fundamental objections to that. Number one, notice this. He brings the offering to the priest, who takes a handful of it as a memorial portion and burns it on the altar on top of the offerings made to the Lord by fire. In other words, the flour offering is now joined together with the blood sacrifices that are on the altar, and now participates in the atoning power of the altar, and hence substitutes for his inability to afford an animal. Nowhere is it taught that the flour in and of itself has atoning power. Never did God say, I've given you flour on the altar. Never did God speak of flour power, which some from my generation understand. Different flour, different power. Nowhere did it say, if you don't have the temple standing, just bring flour. The whole power of this was that it joined in with the altar and the ongoing sacrificial system. One rabbi recently challenged this and said that it's wrong to translate this on the offerings made to the Lord by fire. It's rather, it should be translated on the fires of the Lord, but that's bogus and easily refuted. As we reference our article on the Real Messiah website in the study guide. So the only power that the flour offering had was when it was placed on, as it reads here, on the fire offerings that were given to the Lord. And this way, the poor Israelite could join in the rest of the sacrificial system. But nowhere do we ever have it recorded that people had the notion that without the altar, the flour still had power. With the temple destroyed and without the atoning system, the flour had power. The only power it had was in participation with the blood sacrifices. The only power it had was in participation with the larger tabernacle, temple, priestly atoning system. Outside of that, why in exile didn't they just say, well, let's throw flour in the air? We'll put flour on our faces. Why didn't they do that? Because flour in itself had no atoning power, any more than they thought, we can just offer blood sacrifices anywhere. It had to be in one specific place, in one specific setting, and the flour was powerless unless joined with the blood sacrifice. Okay, another simple one. What about incense? What about incense? Numbers 16. People have sinned grievously. A plague breaks out. After God judges the guilty parties, a plague breaks out when the people start to decide, we're going to stone Moses and Aaron. I mean, they're furious. Next day, verse 41, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. You've killed the Lord's people, they said. And it's just in these chapters right around here. I mean, the opposition is getting fierce, and other talk of stoning Moses and Aaron. Here they're grumbling against them. Well, the assembly gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron and turned toward the tent of meeting. Suddenly the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron went to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord said to Moses, get away from this assembly so I can put an end to them at once. And they fell face down. Then Moses said to Aaron, take your censer and put incense in it, along with fire from the altar, and hurry to the assembly to make atonement for them. Wrath has come out from the Lord. The plague has started. Remember we told you that one of the meanings